Hi, I'm Vanessa. They always said I was the strong one, the quiet one, the one who didn't need anything. And maybe that's why they thought they could take everything without asking. My med school fund, given to my sister, my research, claimed in her name, even the house I grew up in, lost behind my back until I bought it without telling them. Then one night, at dinner, Claire smirked and said, "Remember when they picked my college over your med school?" Dad raised his glass and smiled. Good thing we bet on Claire. So I opened the envelope and watched their world flip in silence. But how did it get to this point? And how many times can one family erase you before you finally stop disappearing? Let me tell you, I could feel the tension the moment I stepped onto the porch of my childhood home. The paint on the front door was flaking, the welcome mat was frayed, and the porch light flickered like a dying firefly. Des Moines evenings in early October had that kind of chill that slipped beneath your coat, quiet, but insistent. And as I reached for the doorknob, I knew this dinner wasn't going to be just about pot roast and small talk. Inside, the smell of overcooked onions clung to the air like regret. The dining room looked the same as it did when I was 16, except older, more tired. Wallpaper yellowed at the edges, a framed cross-stitch reading "Family First" hung crooked on the wall, and the once proud china cabinet now had a noticeable lean. Claire's voice echoed from the kitchen, overly loud, theatrical. "It's from the article in Des Moines Monthly. They wanted a shot of me by the courthouse steps, but I said no. I wanted something more personal." I followed the sound, spotting her in her full performative glow. She held a wine glass like a prop, gesturing dramatically as Mom beamed at her. Dad stood by the counter with his arms crossed, nodding like her manager. Then there was me, standing in the doorway like a guest in my own home. On the refrigerator, I saw the cover of the magazine Claire was talking about. Her photo stared back, bright smile, stiff shoulders, arms crossed with fake confidence. The caption read, "Clare Brenton, the legal mind of the Midwest." I almost laughed. Claire hadn't won a case worth mentioning in years, but she sure knew how to market herself. "Vanessa, honey," Mom called out, finally noticing me. "You made it just in time." Claire turned with a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We were just talking about the article. Did you see it yet?" I glanced at it. I replied evenly. Dad cleared his throat. "You know, not every day one of our own gets featured like that. It's quite a thing." "Yeah," I said, walking toward the dining table. "It's something." Dinner was already plated. Mom had pulled out the special occasion dishes, floral edges, slightly chipped, just like always. She served Claire first. I seated myself at the far end of the table, across from the sideboard where a stack of unopened bills teetered beside a bowl of dusty mints. For the first few minutes, I let them talk. Claire relayed a story about a difficult client who didn't understand legal jargon. Dad chuckled like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all year. Mom kept offering Claire more potatoes. Then came the moment that split the air. Claire took a sip of her wine, leaned back, and with a grin that had razors behind it, said, "Remember when they picked my college over your med school, Ness?" The table paused. My name hadn't even been in the air for 5 minutes before she stabbed it. Dad laughed, not even looking at me. "Good thing we bet on Claire." Mom chuckled too, eyes flicking toward me, not a trace of apology in them. I sat there, watching their faces, their cheerfulness so sharp it sliced through years of quiet hurt. And then, I smiled, just slightly. I reached down, pulled my bag from the side of the chair, and placed a thick manila envelope on the table. "I've been meaning to bring this," I said, my tone steady. Claire looked at it like it was a snake coiled and ready to strike. "What is that?" I slid it toward Dad. "The deed." He blinked. "To what?" "To this house," I said plainly. "You refinanced it 3 times to pay for Claire's law school, her condo, and her networking trips. You defaulted. The bank put it up for foreclosure 3 months ago. I bought it." Silence. Claire's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Mom's face turned the color of chalk. Dad opened the envelope with shaking fingers, scanning the documents. His lips moved, forming words silently. "You're joking," Claire muttered. "That's not possible." "It's legal. It's done," I said. You bought the house? Mom asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't want you to lose it, but I also couldn't let this keep happening. Dad leaned back, stunned. We didn't even know. I know, I interrupted. That's the problem. Nobody touched their food after that. The table that used to echo with praise for Claire had gone stone cold. And as they sat there, my parents stunned, Claire fuming behind her wine glass, I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just let the silence expand. In that silence, I finally became louder than all of them. I wasn't their afterthought anymore. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the one who saved them, and didn't ask to be thanked. But even as I stared at their shocked faces, I remembered the moment I first knew I was never the one they bet on. I was 17, trembling with hope, holding my med school acceptance letter in both hands. I had worked 2 jobs, tutored younger students, volunteered at the hospital every weekend. I earned that letter. I couldn't wait to show them. Dad barely glanced at it. That's not realistic, Vanessa. Med school's expensive, and we've already started paying for Claire's tuition. Mom added gently, You're strong, honey, Claire. Claire needs the support more. And just like that, my dreams shriveled in their kitchen light. I took that letter upstairs, folded it neatly, and placed it in the back of my desk drawer. I never brought it up again. They never asked. But tonight, they would remember. Not because I said it louder, but because I finally said it with proof. With a pen. With a purchase. With power. As we walked to the car that night, the cool air clung to my skin. I didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even look back at the porch where my parents still stood, the envelope in Dad's hand like a grenade that had already gone off. Sorrel was quiet beside me. She didn't offer platitudes. She knew I didn't want comfort. I wanted silence, the kind that meant power had shifted, not evaporated. Driving home through dimly lit streets, my mind didn't stay in the present. It drifted backward, the way old wounds do when poked just right. Not to last year, not to med school rejections or missed opportunities. It went all the way back to 3rd grade, to cardboard planets and a pine-scented school gym. The science fair had been my first real win. I'd built a model of the solar system, each planet painted by hand, strung from a hanger frame that actually rotated using a tiny motor I salvaged from a broken toy. I still remember how my teacher's eyes widened when the lights dimmed and the planets began to spin, each one glowing from the battery-powered bulbs I'd wired. She said it was beyond grade level, said I had a mind meant for more. I held the blue ribbon so tightly my fingers ached. I couldn't wait to get home. But when I burst through the door, full of pride and clumsy excitement, the living room was already full. Of Claire's drama club friends, of branches and glitter and a papier-mâché tree trunk. She got cast as tree number 2, my mom exclaimed, like Claire had landed a lead role on Broadway. Dad was hot gluing moss onto cardboard. I stood there, ribbon dangling from my wrist, waiting. I waited through the pizza order, through the phone calls to relatives being invited to the big performance. No one asked about my ribbon. No one looked at my model. Eventually, I carried it upstairs and placed it on my dresser. The tiny orbits kept spinning long after I'd crawled into bed. I left them on through the night. It was the only light in the room. That was the first time I realized I could be extraordinary and still invisible. Years later, in college, I tried again. I didn't just want to be seen. I wanted to matter. I poured myself into a research paper on early markers of neurodegenerative diseases. I spent nights in the library, scouring case studies, compiling data. When I got a call from the med school program head saying my preliminary work was promising, I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Claire, by then, was between majors again. One night, she visited campus, claiming she needed to study somewhere that wasn't loud. I let her crash on my futon. I was halfway through my draft, scattered pages everywhere. "This is heavy stuff," she said, flipping through one of my printouts. "It's for a neuro pre-med grant," I told her. "You wouldn't be interested." She smirked. "Who says I'm not?" I should have known then. 3 months later, she emailed me a copy of an article from a regional law school publication. "Guess who got a scholarship essay published?" it read. I clicked the link, expecting something about civil liberties or nonprofit work. Instead, I saw my words, rephrased, rearranged, but undeniably mine. She'd borrowed the structure, lifted my metaphors, and even recycled a story about volunteering in a memory care ward, something she had never done. When I confronted her, her response was so casual, it knocked the breath out of me. "Oh, come on, Ness. We're family. It's all shared, right?" I wish I could say I yelled, that I threw something, that I made a scene, but I didn't. I froze, like I always had. And in that pause, Claire claimed another spotlight with my name still echoing in the dark behind her. Back in the present, the memory made me nauseous. I turned away from the window and looked at my reflection in the kitchen glass. Not much had changed. Same careful eyes, same quiet mouth, but something inside was different. Not rage, no, something colder, something clearer. Sorrel set a mug of tea in front of me. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She just said, "You don't have to carry their silence anymore." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was already setting it down. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked into the spare room we turned into an office and opened the drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside were all the things I had once put away. The blue ribbon, now faded at the edges, a copy of my med school acceptance letter, a printed version of the neuroscience draft, untouched, unsubmitted, still mine. I laid them out on the desk, side by side. These weren't trophies. They were receipts. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want war. But I would not be erased again. The next morning, I received a text from my mother. No apology, just, "Claire's upset. You embarrassed her. This is not how family behaves." I stared at the screen for a long while before typing a reply. Then maybe we're not the kind of family I thought we were. I didn't hit send, not yet. I went outside instead. The morning air still held traces of last night's chill, but the sun had begun to push its way through. Sorrel stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the street like something might change. She looked at me and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I considered lying, but I was done doing that. "No, but I will be." Inside the house, the silence had changed. It wasn't about being shut out anymore. It was the sound of boundaries finally being drawn. I spent most of that night staring at the folder on my desk, the one I'd finally labeled with the truth. The documents inside weren't trophies or weapons. They were pieces of myself I had tucked away for years, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice. They never did. But now I wasn't waiting for them. I was keeping score, not to hurt anyone, but to finally protect the girl who had stayed silent too long. The next morning was foggy and cold. I remember because I had to scrape ice off my windshield, and in doing so, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked, not angry, exactly, more like a storm that had stopped asking for permission. Work passed in a blur. The clinic was understaffed as usual, and I buried myself in back-to-back patient charts until it was past 6 and the hallway lights dimmed. As I packed my things, a notification blinked across my phone. Dad's name, a group text. I hesitated before opening it. "Dinner at our place next Friday," it read. "Celebrating Claire's help with my hospital stay. Her support got me through." I stood in the middle of the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and read it again. My grip on the phone tightened. Claire's help? I was the one who had left work early, who'd sat in the ER for hours, filled out the paperwork, handed over my debit card without a word. I didn't respond. I didn't even forward the text to Sorrel, which I usually did when I needed her to talk me down. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had replayed that week in my head a dozen times. The hospital, Dad groggy and confused, Mom flustered, Claire conveniently out of town for a networking event. I'd canceled 3 meetings. I'd stayed through the night. But Claire had shown up 2 days later with a tray of muffins and posted a photo on social media with the caption, "Family means showing up, even when it's hard." The comments section read like a Hallmark card. "You're such a blessing, Claire. He's lucky to have you. God knew what he was doing when he made you sisters." No one ever asked where I was. That weekend, I found myself back at the house, Mom's 60th birthday. It was the kind of celebration she always dreamed of. Lace tablecloths, wine glasses she'd been saving for the right occasion, candles that smelled like vanilla, and a Pinterest board. I had spent months restoring the necklace from her mother's wedding, an old heirloom that had sat in a dusty box under her bed since the late 90s. I found a jeweler, paid for the delicate work myself, and even got the clasp re-engraved with her initials. I wrapped it in soft velvet, placed it inside a polished wooden box, and wrote a handwritten note tucked beneath the lid. She opened it during dessert, in front of everyone. Her hands trembled just slightly when she held it up. "Claire, you always know just what I like," she said, eyes glistening. I blinked. Laughter bubbled at the table. Claire leaned over, gave Mom a peck on the cheek, and whispered, "You deserve the best, Mama." The box was still in front of me. The note was still inside. I looked at Sorrel, who sat across from me. She knew. Her face didn't change, but her eyes flicked to the necklace, then to Claire, then back to me. I smiled politely and drank the rest of my wine in one long pull. On Monday, a photo of Mom wearing the necklace showed up online with the caption, "A gift from Claire. She knows my heart." The comments were, again, exactly what you'd expect. "That girl never misses. She gets it from her mama." Claire has always been the thoughtful one. I didn't correct it. Neither did Claire. That night, as I folded laundry and watched Sorrel silently stack dishes in the kitchen, I said aloud for the first time, "I think I've been trained to stay quiet." She didn't stop what she was doing. "Trained by who?" "My family," I said. "By the way they reward silence. By how every time I've spoken up, they've made me feel like I'm being dramatic, like I'm jealous." She dried her hands and turned to face me. "You think staying quiet makes you graceful?" I used to. I used to think it made me mature, like I was above it." Sorrel crossed the room and sat beside me. "Grace is strength, sure, but letting yourself disappear isn't noble, Vanessa." "It's tragic." I didn't reply. I just nodded, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. The following weekend, while cleaning out the storage closet, I found more. Old journals, receipts, photos, snapshots of the life I lived in the margins. An envelope with a check stub from the time I paid Claire's rent during her so-called internship in Chicago. A thank you card, unsigned. A copy of the first draft of my med school personal statement. A note Claire had scribbled in the margin. "This is actually good. Mind if I use parts of it?" I never said no. I laid everything out on the dining table, not with a sense of revenge, but of clarity. It was a puzzle I had finally finished. The pieces all fit. I pulled a folder from the cabinet, slid everything inside, and sealed it. Then, I took a Sharpie and wrote across the front in bold capital letters. "When they rewrite me, I'll hand them the truth." I meant what I wrote on that folder. I didn't say it out of spite or bitterness. It was simply the truth. But I knew better than to believe the truth alone could survive in my family. Not without proof, and certainly not without a voice. Mine. 2 weeks after organizing that folder, I was invited to speak at a fundraiser in downtown Des Moines. It was a health equity gala, filled with local leaders, hospital board members, nonprofit executives, the kind of crowd that smiled politely but rarely looked you in the eye unless your last name meant something. My invitation came through a colleague at the clinic. She had nominated me after reading a paper I'd published on rural care gaps. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, data-backed, personal, rooted in years of quiet service. I agreed to speak, not to prove anything, but because I believed the work mattered. Sorrel helped me prep the speech the night before. We sat in our living room, sipping tea, revising the final paragraph. "Leave them with something sharp," she said. "But not cruel." I nodded. "I'm not trying to cut, just clarify." The next evening, I arrived early. The ballroom was warm, decorated in soft gold lighting and towering floral centerpieces that smelled like they cost more than my car's monthly insurance. I wore a navy dress, professional but simple. No one greeted me at the door, but I'd expected that. An hour in, after a few rounds of speeches, the MC stepped up and cleared his throat into the microphone. "Our next speaker is a woman many of you already know, a leader in advocacy, a voice for underserved communities. Please welcome Dr. Clare Brenton. I blinked. There was a beat of confusion in the room, a couple of sideways glances, then applause. Claire stood up from a table near the front, smoothing her dress as she walked to the stage. My prepared speech was in her hands. I recognized the font. I recognized the edits I'd made the night before. She launched into it with ease, her cadence slower, more theatrical than mine. She paused in places I hadn't written pauses. She added little anecdotes that didn't belong to her. At one point, she said, "When I first volunteered at the clinic on the East Side, I saw firsthand how poverty intersects with access." Claire had never set foot in that clinic, not once. The applause when she finished was louder than it had been all night. I clapped, too, slowly, not out of support, but out of necessity. I knew if I didn't, someone would notice. When the crowd dispersed for coffee and dessert, I made my way to the hallway outside the ballroom, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. She joined me a few minutes later, all smiles. "Well?" she asked. "What'd you think?" "That was my speech." She shrugged. "It was your idea, but my delivery. You get how this works." "You stole my words." "We're sisters, Ness. Come on, isn't everything shared?" I stared at her, realizing there was no shame, no flicker of guilt, only entitlement. "One day," I said, voice low and even, "people will know the difference." She scoffed. "By then, it won't matter." I walked away without another word. Later that week, I attended an alumni event at my undergrad alma mater. I had been chosen for a medical leadership award. Nothing national, just a quiet acknowledgement of service, the kind that happens when you're not trying to be seen. The auditorium was modest, filled with familiar faces from old biology labs and TA-led lectures. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage to a kind, warm applause. I scanned the crowd and saw my mother beaming in the third row. The faculty lead handed me the plaque, then turned to the microphone and said, "We're joined tonight by Vanessa's family. Elaine, would you like to say a few words?" My mother stood, took the mic, and smiled. "We are just so proud of our daughter, Claire. She's always had the heart of a leader." There it was again. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct her. The audience gave another round of applause, assuming perhaps I went by my middle name. Or maybe they thought we were twins. It didn't matter. I took the mic next, smiled gently, and said, "Thank you for this recognition. It means more than you know." Afterward, in the hallway, my mom hugged me tight. "It was a slip of the tongue," she whispered. "You know what I meant." "Do I?" That night, back at home, Sorrel sat with me on the couch while I watched footage from both events. Her fingers traced slow circles on my shoulder as I played Claire's speech again. "You going to let them keep doing this?" she asked softly. I muted the video. "They've taken my words, my work, my name." So? "So no," I said. "Next time they speak for me, I'll answer." And I meant it, not as a threat, but as a promise to myself. I wasn't going to shout or argue. I wasn't going to post anything online or send dramatic emails. I was simply going to be undeniable. The drive home from the alumni ceremony had been quiet, not heavy, but thoughtful. I remember glancing at Sorrel as she drove, her hand resting gently on the gear shift, her eyes watching the road but occasionally flicking my way, checking. I hadn't said much since I told her, "Next time they speak for me, I'll answer." I meant it, but I also knew silence, when it's lasted long enough, doesn't just break, it has to be unlearned. A few days later, just after lunch at the clinic, I sat in my office sorting through billing files when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the bank. A withdrawal of $4,500 had been made from an old joint account I had with my mother. That account had been created when I was in college, technically hers, but used for emergencies when I was putting myself through undergrad and couldn't always afford groceries or car repairs. It was barely touched in the last few years. We had agreed, mutually, that it would stay untouched unless it was absolutely necessary. There had been no emergency. I logged into the account, heart thudding low in my chest. The funds had gone to a credit agency, a payment on a maxed out card, Claire's card. I didn't react right away. I just sat there, blinking at the screen, the buzz of the fluorescent lights over my head suddenly sharp. I waited until the clinic closed, then drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't call first. I didn't knock when I got there. I walked in like I used to, back when things hadn't felt so transactional. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot. The scent of beef stew filled the air. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, sweetie, I was just thinking of calling you." I leaned against the counter. "We need to talk about the account." She didn't pretend not to know what I meant. She didn't even blink. Claire needed help. It was a temporary thing. I stared at her. "Without asking me?" "You weren't using it," she said simply. "It's not like you'd miss it. It wasn't yours to touch." She set the spoon down, her voice softening in that way she always used when trying to end a conversation without resolution. "She's your sister. She's going through a lot right now." "And I'm not? You've always been the strong one." There it was, that line. The justification they used like a get-out-of-jail-free card. I pushed away from the counter and walked out before I said something I'd regret. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the park near our apartment, the one with the little wooden benches facing the lake. It was dusk by the time I sat down, and the air had cooled. I pulled out my phone, logged into my bank, and transferred every remaining dollar out of the joint account. Then I made a call to close it entirely. That weekend, I started pulling my name off anything even remotely tied to the family estate. I thought that would be the end of it, until I received a letter from the city housing office 2 weeks later. It was addressed to me, but the content didn't make sense. "Congratulations," it read. "Your low-income rent deduction has been approved." I didn't apply for that. The letter included a breakdown, proof of residence at my address, Claire's name as the applicant. Somehow, she had used my home address, my personal, private residence, to claim she lived there, qualifying her for a program she didn't meet the criteria for. I was stunned. This went beyond selfishness. It was illegal, and it put my own tax records at risk. Sorrel found me standing in the kitchen, holding the letter with shaking hands. I handed it to her without a word. She read it, her face growing still. "She used your address?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "She didn't even tell me. She just assumed you'd stay silent." Not this time. The next morning, I called my mother. "Not Claire. Not yet." She answered on the second ring, cheery as if nothing were wrong. "Vanessa, hi!" I cut her off. "I received a letter from the city. Claire used my address to apply for housing assistance. She committed fraud, and unless she fixes it, I'm filing a report." There was a pause. "Vanessa, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. She didn't mean any harm. It was probably just a mix-up." "It wasn't. She listed my apartment, forged documentation, and now my own taxes might be flagged. I'm not covering for her again." Mom sighed, that long, exaggerated sigh that said she was exhausted by my dramatics. "You always take things too far. She's your sister. And that's not an excuse anymore. You're threatening your own family." "No," I said, voice steady, colder than I expected. "I've just finally learned that silence has a cost." And I hung up. The following day, I opened a separate account in a different bank under my name only. I updated my payroll, my medical licenses, every point of contact that had once listed my parents' house as a backup. I submitted a preliminary inquiry to the city's fraud division. I didn't name Claire yet, but I documented everything. I even printed the forms, sealed them in a folder, wrote the same sentence on the front in black ink. When they rewrite me, I'll hand them the truth. Because this wasn't just about money or addresses or even legal risk. This was about survival. They could ignore the warnings, but they'd soon learn that quiet doesn't mean weak, and my silence was no longer their ally. It was a Friday evening when I found myself sitting alone at the dining table, staring down at a stack of old manila folders. Sorrel had gone out to grab groceries before the storm that was supposed to roll through overnight. The house was quiet, except for the ticking wall clock and the soft hum of the dishwasher. The words I'd said earlier that week kept circling my thoughts like persistent static. I'm ready to stop letting them break me. I meant it. But meaning something and acting on it were two different things. That's what I was coming to understand. You don't rebuild yourself with declarations. You do it in paperwork, bank authorizations, notarized statements, cold, boring things. But that's how power shifts, through signatures, not screaming. My phone buzzed again, another bank alert. I silenced it without checking. I already knew what it was. Overdraft protection triggered because of another accidental family withdrawal. I'd taken steps, sure, but the past had a habit of reaching forward, clawing at anything that wasn't nailed down. I stood up and walked toward the back room, the one Sorrel and I used for storage. Boxes lined the walls, each one labeled in my tidy print. But one box near the back wasn't like the others. Its tape had been peeled off and loosely resealed, as if someone had rummaged through it without care. I pulled it out, dragged it to the center of the floor, and opened the lid. Inside were pieces of my childhood. Old school awards, cards from teachers, hand-drawn pictures with glitter still flaking off the edges. A crumpled letter from a summer science program I was accepted to, but never attended, because Claire had a dance recital the same weekend and we could only do so much. At the very bottom, I found a college composition notebook, its edges worn, pages stained with age. Flipping it open, I landed on a single entry from my sophomore year. The handwriting was mine, rushed, slanted. Claire got caught cheating. Again. She was in full panic. Dad said it could cost her the scholarship. Mom cried. I rewrote the paper overnight, used a sample I'd started for my own ethics course. No one thanked me. This morning, Claire smiled and told me, "You're such a lifesaver." I closed the notebook, hands shaking, not with anger, but something colder. Resentment aged into resolve, the kind of quiet that no longer flinched. That memory still stung, not because of what I did, but because of what it cost me. It wasn't just a paper. It was a piece of myself I handed over without hesitation, because somewhere along the line, I had been trained to believe Claire's success was more important than my own. The following morning, Sorrel and I drove over to my parents' place. Dad hadn't been well lately. He was losing weight, forgetting things. I hadn't wanted to cut him off from visits. Not yet. Mom greeted us at the door with her usual rehearsed warmth, all sugary concern and overly bright eyes. "You're early," she said, stepping aside to let us in. "Claire's upstairs finishing a call. She's launching a new mentorship thing, some online platform for women in law." I nodded, taking in the familiar smells of furniture polish and coffee. Nothing ever changed in this house, and yet it felt like everything had eroded. "I just want to check on Dad," I said. "He's resting," she replied. "But go ahead." I walked up the stairs, passing the framed photos lining the walls. Every one of them had Claire front and center: homecoming court, graduation, the internship at that DC law office she didn't last 3 months in. When I opened the door to what used to be my old bedroom, I froze. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. It was a studio. Cameras mounted to ring lights. A green screen pinned across one wall. Shelves lined with books I knew she hadn't read. And in the corner, a pile of discarded boxes, my boxes. I walked over, sifting through them. Some were open. One had been torn. My journals, trophies, letters, all dumped into a trash bag like leftovers. I didn't say a word. I just picked up the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back downstairs. Claire was in the living room by then, sipping coffee with one leg crossed over the other like a lifestyle blogger. When she saw the bag, her expression didn't change. "That stuff?" she said casually. "You don't live here. Why keep things that don't matter?" I didn't respond. I just looked her dead in the eye, turned, and walked out the front door. Back at home, I emptied the trash bag onto our living room floor. Sorrel helped me sort through it. Some of the pages were bent, others stained. A few were salvageable. "You okay?" she asked softly. "No," I answered. "But I'm done letting them decide what matters." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm roll in. Around 3 a.m., I got up, made a cup of tea, and sat down at my computer. I opened a file I'd been too afraid to act on for weeks, one I'd created after learning about the house's foreclosure status. The paperwork was already in motion. My parents were 4 payments behind. The house was technically in pre-foreclosure. I called the lawyer Monday morning. We met that afternoon. It was quiet in the office, the kind of space where you didn't raise your voice because the walls were lined with real power, legal terms, deadlines, consequences. I signed the first set of documents calmly, methodically. The lawyer explained everything twice, but I didn't need clarification. I knew exactly what I was doing. By Wednesday, the sale was in escrow. I used personal savings, pulled from years of extra shifts, bonuses I never celebrated, and a small inheritance from my grandmother they'd never even asked about. I didn't tell Sorrel until the deal was nearly done. She looked at me, wide-eyed but steady. "Are you ready to break them?" "No," I said, folding the papers neatly into my bag. "I'm ready to stop letting them break me." She didn't flinch. Not when I said it. Not even when I stared her down in front of the nurse's station. "You've spent years speaking for me. I've just begun telling the truth." Claire's jaw clenched, but her eyes flickered with something close to panic. Just for a second. Then came the scoff, the dramatic sigh, the pivot into performance. Right on cue. She turned to the nurse beside us and muttered loud enough for the entire unit to hear. "Can you believe this? My sister's trying to ruin my life because I wrote a book. That's all this is." No one responded. Just the dull buzz of the overhead lights and the soft shuffle of shoes on tile. Even the heart monitor alarms in the room behind us seemed to pause. It had only been 2 days since I'd submitted the package. Journal entries, early drafts, emails, timestamps. I sent it anonymously, but there was no mistaking who it had come from. The publishing house replied to Claire's team within 24 hours. They weren't canceling the launch yet, but they were freezing all marketing efforts until questions of authorship could be fully investigated. Apparently, authenticity still mattered to someone. That morning, a large envelope arrived at our apartment, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a signed copy of Claire's new memoir, Resilience: My Journey. The cover was predictably overproduced, her face turned 3/4, gazing somewhere upward, like she'd personally solved systemic injustice. A soft blur around the edges. Her name printed large in serif font across the bottom. I cracked it open while Sorrel poured coffee. By the time she handed me a mug, I was already 3 chapters in and shaking. She glanced down at the book and asked, "Is this what I think it is?" I didn't answer. I kept reading. The playground bullying story? Mine. The summer we couldn't afford camp, so I worked at the library to save for textbooks, rewritten as Claire selling lemonade and learning about economics. The ER visit where Dad had a mild heart attack. That one was lifted word for word from an essay I wrote during my fellowship year, the same year Claire was living off my emergency fund, claiming she just needed a little breathing room. "She didn't even change the hospital name," Sorrel said, flipping to a dog-eared page. "She didn't have to," I said. "She knew no one would question it." When the local news aired her interview that night, it was like salt in a reopened wound. Claire sat across from a wide-eyed anchor in a set designed to look like a mid-century living room. She wore soft pink, her makeup perfect, her voice modulated and gentle. "I wrote this book because there are people like me out there," she said, eyes shining. Kids who grew up in houses that told them to stay quiet, who were told their dreams were too big. I was that child. I stood in our kitchen, watching the segment on Sorrel's iPad, my mouth pressed into a thin line. "She's still doing it," I muttered. "She's not even sweating," Sorrel added. "How does she keep a straight face?" I didn't respond. The next morning, I called a contact I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman I knew from residency who now worked in legal compliance for a publishing group in Minneapolis. I didn't ask her to intervene. I just asked her to take a look at the material and tell me if it raised a red flag. She called me back before lunch. "I can't say much officially," she said, "but yes, if that material checks out, there's a serious liability issue. They're going to delay the tour, probably pull first print run distribution, quietly if they can." I thanked her, closed my office door, and allowed myself one deep breath. But I knew Claire wouldn't go down quietly. And I was right. She showed up that Thursday at the hospital. She wore a navy blazer like armor and heels that clacked against the linoleum like accusations. I was finishing rounds when I saw her walk in, her posture stiff, jaw set, eyes scanning the room until they found me. "Vanessa!" she barked, loud enough to make two nurses stop in mid-chart. I didn't move. I let her come to me. "You need to stop this," she hissed once she was close. "You've made your point." "I haven't made anything. You wrote lies. People noticed. I shared my truth. You're just mad they liked it." I didn't raise my voice. "You repackaged my life, and now that someone's finally asking questions, you're playing the victim." "You don't get to call me that," she snapped. "You've always had a chip on your shoulder about being the boring one. You stayed in town. You worked in a clinic. You gave up. I didn't." I paused, then asked evenly, "Is that what you think this is about? That I envy you?" She didn't answer. She just stared, nostrils flaring. "You never wanted to be seen," she said finally. So I stepped up. "That's not stealing. That's filling a void." I tilted my head. "No, that's rewriting history to fit your needs." I turned and walked away. Sorrel met me in the break room 10 minutes later. She didn't ask what had happened. I must have looked calm, but she knew. She always did. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "She just tried her last swing." "And?" "She missed." The day before the dinner, I was in my office finishing notes when I got the call from the conference coordinator in Chicago. She sounded apologetic. "We tried to confirm your attendance weeks ago," she said, "but we never heard back. We assumed you'd declined." "I never received the email," I said, spinning my chair toward the window, trying to keep my voice even. "That's strange. It was sent the same week your team registered the laptop. Does someone else use your device?" My stomach dropped. Claire had borrowed my laptop the week I was out of town. She said hers had crashed again, and she needed to finish a project. I didn't think twice. I handed it over. Of course she had redirected my emails. Of course. That night, I sat with Sorrel at the kitchen table, rereading the email she eventually helped recover. My invitation had been there, time-stamped, sitting in my junk folder the entire time. I could have spoken on a national stage. I could have connected with physicians and researchers and advocates who actually cared. But Claire had stolen more than my words. She'd stolen a door I didn't even know had opened for me. "I don't know what's worse," I said, setting my phone down. "That she did this, or that I wasn't even surprised." Sorrel reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. "You don't need to warn them again, Vanessa. You already did. Now, you show them." I nodded. Friday came quickly. I dressed carefully. Navy slacks, a soft white blouse, hair pulled back. Nothing flashy, just sharp. We arrived at my parents' house right before 6. The front porch light flickered like it always had. The walkway was still cracked, weeds curling out like little fists, and yet inside, everything was dressed up. The good china, the polished silverware, Mom's favorite candles glowing on the table like tiny spotlights. Claire was already there, seated at her usual spot, glass of wine in hand, the same smile she wore in her headshots plastered across her face. Mom hovered, adjusting napkins that didn't need fixing. Dad poured drinks. The conversation started light. Weather, someone's knee surgery, local politics. Sorrel and I exchanged glances. We both knew the script. Then, like clockwork, Claire leaned back in her chair, took a sip, and said, "Remember when they picked my college over your med school?" My father chuckled. "Good thing we bet on Clare," he said, with pride so thick it almost stuck in his throat. My mother gave a tight little smirk, eyes not even glancing in my direction. I sat still for a moment. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and placed it in the center of the table. Claire's smile wavered. Dad looked confused. "What's this?" I met his eyes calmly. "It's the deed to the house." He blinked. "I don't understand." "You refinanced it to cover Claire's tuition, then again for her condo, then again when she maxed out her cards. 3 months ago, the bank started foreclosure. You didn't notice, but I did." Mom dropped her fork. The sound was sharp, final. I bought the house, I continued. I own it now. For a long second, no one moved. No one breathed. You're joking, Claire said, eyes wide. You think I joke about saving the house you almost lost? Dad picked up the envelope with shaking fingers. He opened it, scanned the paperwork, his face drained of color. I didn't do this to shame you, I said. I did it because someone had to. But I won't carry this family anymore unless there are changes. Claire's voice was shrill. So what now? You want rent money? No. Mom and Dad can stay. They'll never owe me a dime. But you, Claire, you have 30 days to move out. Her mouth opened, then shut. For once, she had no script. I turned to my parents. There's a trust. It covers property taxes, maintenance, utilities, enough to live comfortably, but it doesn't cover Claire. Not anymore. Mom finally found her voice. Vanessa, she's your sister. She's been living off this house for years while calling it hers. That ends now. Claire stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. You're a snake. This is about ego. You couldn't stand that they loved me more. No, I said, rising. I couldn't stand being erased. Sorrel placed a steadying hand on my back. You're kicking me out, Claire whispered. I'm holding you accountable, I said. It's not the same thing. She stormed out, her glass shattered in the sink on the way. My mother looked down at her plate. My father held the deed like it was a ghost. The room was quiet except for the candles flickering. Then Dad said, barely above a whisper, You were always the one who stood up. We just didn't see it. I didn't reply. I didn't need their apology. Just their silence, while I finally took my place at the table. The house was quiet again. Claire had packed her things, what little she hadn't already spread between 3 apartments, and left 2 days after the 30-day deadline. No dramatic exit, no apology, no hug goodbye. Just a thud of her suitcase against the doorframe and the sound of her car fading down the street. I didn't watch her leave. I was in the garden with Sorrel, trimming back the overgrown hydrangeas my mother never got around to tending anymore. I hadn't planned it that way. It just happened. But it felt right. A few days later, the phone rang while I was making tea. I glanced at the screen. Mom? Just that. No photo, no emoji. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hi, I said. Her voice was softer than usual, hesitant. Vanessa, I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I did. Silence. I'm not calling to talk about Claire, she continued quickly. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I didn't respond immediately. I stirred honey into my cup, the spoon clinking against porcelain. Eventually I said, I'm fine. Good, she said, but her voice cracked on the word. I've been thinking a lot since dinner. So have I. There was another pause, then, would you be willing to meet me? Just for coffee. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. I agreed. 2 days later, we met at a small cafe halfway between my clinic and the old neighborhood. Sorrel came with me, not because I needed backup, but because I needed balance. She sat a few tables away, pretending to read, but keeping me within her reach. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pinned up neatly, but there were more grays than last time. Her eyes had a weariness I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. We ordered. She chose chamomile. I stuck with black coffee. When the drinks arrived, she didn't touch hers, just cupped the mug between her palms like it might offer her answers. I know I hurt you, she began. Not just at dinner. For a long time. I didn't nod. I didn't rush in to ease her guilt. I think, she continued, part of me always thought you didn't need as much. Claire. She was always so loud about what she wanted, about what she lacked. You were steady, responsible. I mistook that for not needing. I looked at her and said, Everyone needs something, Mom, even the quiet ones. She blinked and her lip quivered. We didn't believe in you the way we should have, she said. I see that now. I took a sip of coffee, watching her over the rim. You saw me. You just didn't listen. She nodded slowly, tears brimming. You're right. We didn't hug when we said goodbye. There wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. Just two women who had once misunderstood each other, now trying, maybe too late, to see one another clearly. Over the next few months, I visited the house. Not often, not alone. I'd bring Sorrel or a colleague from the clinic. I'd bring groceries, check the gutters, fix the light switch in the hallway. But I never stayed longer than needed. I didn't move back. That house didn't belong to the version of me I had become. But I kept it. Not for nostalgia. For legacy. One rainy afternoon in early spring, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. It was from Clare. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted, rushed, just a single paragraph. You were always better. I hated you for it. I'm trying to stand on my own now. That's all. I read it 3 times, then folded it, placed it in a drawer. I didn't frame it. I didn't burn it. I let it be. Some days, I walked the lake trail behind our apartment with Sorrel. We'd sit on the bench near the willow tree, watching ducks scatter across the surface. One morning, I brought a journal with me, not one from the past, but a fresh one. New pages, no edits. I had been invited to speak at the same medical school that had once overlooked me. They were now using excerpts from my journals in a class on narrative medicine. I taught there once a week, not for status, but to guide students who, like me, had stories no one asked them to tell. I didn't share my story in full. Not yet. But I taught them how to hold space for the ones who had no voice, how to ask the second question, how to recognize quiet as strength. Sometimes I sat in the back of the classroom after the lecture, watching them pack their bags and file out into the world. And I'd think about that girl in 3rd grade with the solar system project no one praised. The teenager who folded up her med school acceptance letter without a word. The woman who finally stopped whispering. Some families break you, others make you. And sometimes, if you're very brave, you make yourself. Some families will never say they're sorry, but sometimes, silence speaks louder than any apology. Vanessa didn't need their approval in the end, just the space to finally stand without being overshadowed. Have you ever been the quiet one in your family? The one expected to survive without help? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, emotional family stories that cut deep and stay with you. Hi, I'm Calliope. My sister once stood. But that wasn't the worst of it. They left me out of photos, out of toasts, out of every version of the family story that mattered. And when I finally stopped paying, they didn't ask why. They just called me cruel. Then my sister made a GoFundMe and said I abandoned her. But what do you do when silence isn't respected, when your support gets erased, and your name only matters when it's paying for someone else's life? What happens when the one holding it all together finally walks away? I had stayed silent for years, but that night, my silence started to expire. The room was already full when I arrived, though no one seemed to notice. It was Tamsin's night, after all. My sister. The golden one, as Grandma used to say, though never directly to me. I slipped through the side door of the private room at the restaurant and stood for a second, just long enough to let my eyes adjust and scan the space. Round tables filled with cousins, old neighbors, co-workers I didn't recognize. Tamsin was at the center of it all, of course, surrounded, lit up, adored. Verena, our mother, hovered nearby, laughing just a beat too loud at something someone said. I exhaled through my nose, quietly, and made my way to the only empty seat I could find. Back row, near the service entrance, sandwiched between a ficus plant and the swinging kitchen door. Not ideal, but not unexpected. "She's here," someone muttered. I caught the words but didn't look up. It didn't matter who said it. None of them stood to greet me. No one pulled out a chair. The celebration didn't pause. Instead, I heard the clink of a fork against a glass. Tamsin's boyfriend, Owen, tapping to get everyone's attention. "Before dessert," he beamed, "we've got a little tribute. Tamsin's journey. What a ride it's been." The projector flickered on behind him. Photos appeared. Childhood snapshots, graduation caps, summer internships. One caught my attention. Our family vacation to Colorado. There we all were on the screen, smiling in front of a mountain cabin. Except, I wasn't. Tamsin, Verena, Dad, even Owen, who didn't join us until a year later, was photoshopped in. But not me. "Where was I?" I asked, barely a whisper. Verena leaned over just enough to hear me. "You blinked. The original wasn't great. This one just looked better." She said it like she was choosing a salad dressing. I didn't respond. I didn't move. The room burst into applause as the slideshow ended. Owen held up a glass. To Tamsin, the smartest, kindest, most hardworking person I know. She did it all on her own, with nothing but grit and grace. He turned to her, and maybe a little help from Mom and Dad. I blinked once, twice, not a single mention, not one acknowledgement. And I had paid for this dinner. For the last 2 years, I'd been covering Tamsin's tuition. Quietly, automatically. No one asked me to, they just assumed. Verena had mentioned financial gaps and bad timing, and I offered to help. No ceremony, no contracts, just monthly wire transfers, textbook reimbursements, and rent split quietly between 2 accounts. I skipped vacations. I skipped new tires. I skipped Christmas. But it didn't matter. Not when she stood there in her designer dress, her voice dripping with polished charm. "I wouldn't be here without the incredible support system around me," she said into the mic. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Owen. And thank you to my professors, my mentors, and my incredible resilience." The room roared. I clapped once, twice, then stopped. Dinner rolled out. Dry chicken, 2 sweet wine, polite conversations about future plans. I stayed quiet. No one missed my voice. They were too busy asking Owen when the engagement was happening. At some point, someone passed out little framed prints of the family photo as keepsakes. I didn't take one. By the time dessert came, a ridiculous tower of macarons that no one touched, I had already made up my mind. I pulled my phone from my bag under the table, tapped into my banking app, pulled up the last transaction labeled Tamsin Housing Fund. The confirmation blinked at me in blue. I bookmarked it, then closed the app. No drama, no announcements. My eyes drifted upward just in time to catch another photo being taken. Tamsin holding a champagne flute high, Verena on one side, Owen on the other. The photographer gestured to the crowd, asking for someone to squeeze in. Someone pointed to a cousin instead of me. Of course they did. I adjusted my seat just slightly, so the plant hid me completely. I didn't say a word when I walked back in. The air inside the restaurant had shifted slightly, louder, looser. More wine had been poured. People were standing now, moving from table to table, grabbing photos, exchanging hugs. I slid back into my chair, unnoticed. The cushion hadn't even cooled. It was as if I'd never left. From across the room, I could hear someone saying, "She's got it made, that one. No loans, no stress. Tamsin's living right." A laugh followed, then a follow-up from another voice, one I didn't recognize. "Doesn't her sister cover everything?" Owen, standing nearby, raised his glass and chimed in with mock pride. "Hey, don't out our secret. Tamsin's got a sponsor. Just kidding, sort of." Then came the line that cut cleaner than any insult ever had. Tamsin turned, glass in hand, a slight sway in her step and a too bright smile. "Oh, please," she said, waving vaguely in my direction. "She acts like she's some kind of savior. But let's be real, we've carried her for years. She's just a leech." The music didn't stop, but it should have. There was no dramatic gasp, no shocked silence, just a ripple of awkward glances, a few fake chuckles, and then the party tried to continue itself, like a wheel that stumbled but kept rolling. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just looked at her. She didn't look back. I felt my mother's hand brush my shoulder, light as dust. "She didn't mean it, sweetie," she whispered, her voice laced with practiced nonchalance. "You know how she gets when she's had a drink." Owen laughed and clapped a hand on someone's back. It's okay. Family's allowed to vent, right? I stood up slowly, steady, without a sound. No one stopped me. I walked past 3 half-empty wine bottles, a centerpiece of wilting hydrangeas, and a waiter carrying a tray of untouched tiramisu. I pushed through the glass door to the patio, where the noise faded into a dull hum behind me. The air outside was cool for once, carrying that dry desert chill that only shows up after the sun has finally given up. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the cold. Out there, under a strand of twinkle lights someone had bothered to hang for ambiance, I let myself breathe. That word, leech, rattled around in my head like a loose marble in an empty jar. Not because it surprised me, because it didn't. It had been years since Tamsin last saw me as someone she needed, let alone respected. There was a time once when she defended me, 5th grade, on the bus. A boy had pulled my ponytail and called me dumb. She'd yanked his backpack and told him, "That girl is my sister. You don't get to talk to her like that." I used to remember that moment with warmth, but now it felt like something I'd made up, or something she'd said for show. I was her shield back then, I muttered to myself. Now I'm her shadow. Inside, someone popped another cork. I pulled out my phone again, opening the email confirmation for the last tuition payment. The subject line, "Wire transfer successful, dated 2 days ago. Amount, more than my monthly rent." My thumb hovered over the Cancel Auto Renew option. I didn't press it, not yet. Instead, I closed the email, locked my phone, and looked up at the stars. They were faint, blurred by city lights and noise, but still there, still steady. I stood outside for a while longer, until the music shifted to something slower, until the laughter softened into low murmurs. Then, just as quietly as I had left, I returned to the room. My chair waited for me like a ghost no one had noticed missing. I sat down, pulled the chair in, smiled, reached into my bag and typed a short message to my financial manager. "Pause all tuition-related payments. I'll follow up." Then I set my phone face down, folded my napkin across my lap, and looked ahead at nothing in particular. Some things break loudly, others just stop. The morning after the dinner, I was at Verina's house, still running on polite autopilot. She called earlier to ask if I could help clean out the garage. "Just a few boxes," she'd said, like she didn't remember I had barely slept, like she forgot last night even happened or wanted me to. I pulled into the driveway around 10. The sun was already starting its climb over the Tucson rooftops, but the garage was shaded and cool. Verina handed me a box marked Tamsin School and waved toward the pile. "Sort what you want, toss what you don't. I'll be in the kitchen if you need tea." I didn't need tea. I needed honesty. But that wasn't on the menu here. The box was dusty but not sealed. Inside were binders, glittery notebooks, worn-out folders. A few childhood drawings, unicorns, volcanoes, a family portrait with 4 figures. I wasn't one of them. I kept going, paper by paper, until something folded and yellowed caught my attention. I thought it might be a class letter or a school permission slip, but as I unfolded it, I recognized the handwriting instantly. Tamsin. Her name signed at the bottom in big loops. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was just written. Like a journal entry she never meant anyone to find, or maybe she hoped someone would. I hate when Calliope follows me around. She's so clingy, always asking questions. I wish she'd just disappear sometimes. It'd be quieter. I stared at it for longer than I probably should have. I wasn't 10 anymore, but something about reading those words as an adult made them sharper, not duller. There were no exclamation points, no spelling errors. She had written it with intent. That feeling of being excess, of being tolerated but not wanted, it had a paper trail. I folded the note back, slower this time, and set it aside. I wasn't sure why I kept it. Maybe as proof I hadn't imagined it all. Verina appeared in the doorway with a mug in hand. "Find anything good?" I held up the letter without speaking. She took one glance and shrugged. You girls wrote all sorts of things. Kids can be dramatic. I waited. No apology came. Besides, she added, sipping her tea, you've always been more sensitive. You take things too personally. I take things personally? I asked, my voice calm, but not soft. You know what I mean, she said, with that slight tilt of her head she used when trying to look reasonable. You're the younger one. You always had more space, more leniency. Tamsin had more pressure. You had more freedom. It makes sense you'd be a little more emotional. She didn't say spoiled, but it hung in the air like it was waiting to be spoken. I looked back at the note in my hand. You always made me feel like I had to apologize just for being here, I said, not to accuse her, but because it was simply true. Verena sighed. Not with guilt, more like inconvenience. Calliope, you're a grown woman. Don't dig up the past just to feel wronged. I almost laughed. I didn't dig it up. It was right there, labeled and boxed. She turned back toward the kitchen. Let it go. You've got your job, your place, your life. You should be grateful. There it was. That word. Grateful. As if I hadn't been. As if the very act of standing here without asking for anything wasn't gratitude enough. She disappeared into the house again, and I stayed in the garage, the note still in my fingers. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. But something inside me moved, like a hinge rusted too long finally shifted. By late afternoon, the sun was harsh, and the work was done. I took the note, folded it into a small envelope I pulled from my bag, and wrote on it in capital letters. Proof, for me. I slipped it into my laptop case, next to some legal papers I'd been meaning to file. Then I walked back inside and stood for a moment in the living room, staring at the family photo on the mantel. A polished silver frame, a perfect smile, Tamsin in her cap and gown, Owen beside her, Verena just behind, proud and beaming. I wasn't in the picture. I hadn't been invited for that photo either. It wasn't even noon when I hit the 10 freeway heading west. Verena had sent a text that morning, asking if I could drop off some paperwork at Fullerton State, something Tamsin needed for a scholarship panel. I wasn't in the mood for errands, but I wasn't in the mood for another phone call from her either. So I packed my laptop, printed the file, and drove the 5 hours in silence, stopping once for gas and a bitter coffee. By the time I parked near the student center, the sun was high, and the campus buzzed with students darting between buildings. I had called Tamsin before I left a voicemail. No response. Typical. I didn't see her when I walked inside the lobby. No wave from a bench. No quick, be right there text. So I asked the receptionist if she could pass the folder along and stepped aside. That's when I heard it. Familiar, but too out of place to ignore. Calliope? I turned. Ms. Redley, our high school counselor. Now slightly thinner, with streaks of white in her hair and reading glasses pushed halfway down her nose. Wow, she said. Didn't expect to run into you here. She looked at the folder in my hand. Helping Tamsin? I nodded. She tilted her head, searching my face for something. Still figuring things out, huh? It's okay. Not everyone finds their path early. I didn't say a word. Just smiled. A tight, practiced smile. The kind you use when someone steps on your foot and apologizes like it was your fault. She gave my arm a light squeeze before walking off, like I was still 17, fragile, adrift. Outside, I found a shaded bench near the campus coffee kiosk. I pulled out my laptop, connected to my hotspot, and joined a Project Sync call. On my screen were 2 dashboards, one for a U.S. contract, another for a rollout we just launched in Canada. My team pinged updates, I gave notes, adjusted milestones. I could have done it from home, but there was something satisfying about doing it right here, surrounded by strangers who thought I was irrelevant. The call ended just as 2 girls walked past. Their conversation was loud enough to hear. That's her, right? One whispered. Tamsin's sister? The other rolled her eyes. Yeah, she's like their IT mascot. I think she's always fixing Wi-Fi or something. Both laughed. I didn't move. They didn't know I heard, or they didn't care. I closed my laptop slowly and looked around. Banners flapped above the walkway. Celebrate first-gen college students! A few students posed beneath them, holding signs and smiling wide. I muttered under my breath, some of us just skipped the debt. My phone buzzed. Verena, thanks for dropping it off. Tamsin was busy with a panel. Another text followed seconds later. Just don't linger too long. You're not faculty. Try not to embarrass her. I stared at the messages. No thank you. No question about the drive. Just stay invisible. I opened my email, attached a proposal draft to our internal server, and clicked send without adding my name to the doc. I'd long stopped signing things that didn't need it. Let the credit float. Across the quad, a student with a camera filmed a classmate for some kind of campus feature. I watched them set up the shot, adjust the angles, make everything seem more polished than it really was. I knew that trick. Back at the car, I passed a glass window and caught my reflection. No makeup, hair in a knot, backpack slung over one shoulder. I didn't look like a dropout. I didn't look like a backup plan. I looked like a woman who had given more than anyone noticed and was done explaining it. I drove back to Tucson late that evening. The traffic had thinned after the rush, and the desert sky dimmed into a dark copper haze. I kept the radio low, not listening, just needing the sound of something other than my own thoughts bouncing off the windshield. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and powered up my laptop, intending to check a few project dashboards. Something simple, something that wouldn't bleed. Instead, I opened Instagram. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for a distraction. Maybe I needed a reason. There it was, Tamsin's latest post. A beach photo. Her holding a cocktail in one hand, a sun hat in the other. Palm trees behind her, water too blue to be anywhere near Arizona. Captioned, "Work hard, rest harder." Self-funded queen. Self-funded. She was wearing the swimsuit I bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. I remembered because it was too expensive, but she said she needed it for a school trip. I told her, pick one, and she picked the most ridiculous thing on the rack. My finger hovered over the screen, then dropped to open my banking app instead. The last transfer labeled Spring Tuition Support, TB, had gone out 6 days ago. A separate charge on my credit card, same day, showed an airline booking. She hadn't just taken a trip. She'd used the money I sent for her tuition to vacation in Cancun. And then she posted about it. Bragged about it. Publicly. As if I were the fool for ever thinking that generosity deserved discretion. My phone buzzed. It was my father, Javier. His name flashing across the screen felt like a trigger all its own. I picked up. "Calliope," he said without a greeting, his tone clipped. "I just talked to your mother. Why are you cutting Tamsin off now?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to see how far he'd go. "She needs consistency, not drama," he continued. "It's her last semester. You pull funding now, she could lose housing. She's already under pressure. This is not the time for pride." I kept my voice steady. "Did she tell you where she is right now?" There was a pause. "Isn't she on campus?" "No," I said, calm but sharp. "She's in Cancun, on my money." Silence. Then a sigh. "I'm sure there's an explanation." "There is," I cut in. "She lied. That's the explanation." I didn't wait for a defense. I just hung up. There are moments when anger burns, and there are moments when it calcifies, turns into something harder, colder. That was one of those. I opened my laptop again, this time with purpose. New document. Subject: Financial suspension of support. Effective immediately, I kept it short. Clean. No emotion, no threats. Just facts. I copied Verena, Tamsin, and Javier. 3 sentences. 1 attached PDF. Then I logged into the housing portal I'd used to set up her lease last year. The account was under my name. So were the utilities. I flagged everything as hold status and removed her from authorized access. No messages, no heads up. I wasn't being cruel. I was being finished. Next, I went into my shared Google Drive folders and moved every tuition-related document to a private, locked archive. Then I changed the passwords. All of them. The relief didn't hit like a wave. It arrived like a door clicking shut. My phone chimed again. This time, it was from work. My assistant, Renee, asking if I wanted to allocate remaining quarter-end funds into the new internship program. I typed back, "Yes, reallocate everything. Remove all family disbursements." After I hit send, I sat back and looked at the city lights through my window. It was quiet. Just the hum of the fridge, the dull thump of neighbors' music next door. I whispered out loud, not to anyone in particular. If they wanted a sponsor, they should have respected the terms. By the time the sun crept up again, Tucson was already dry and humming. I was sitting at my dining table, laptop open, trying to finish a project timeline while sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug that said, "I owe me." The city moved outside my window, but inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet, like the kind of quiet that holds its breath before a storm. That's when Verina's text came in. Tamsin's graduation is coming up. She's always dreamed of having that Louis Vuitton monogram Alma. You know the one. Maybe it could be your gift to her? A second message followed almost instantly. She won't say it out loud, but she's been through a lot. A little celebration would really help smooth things over. You know how she is. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink, just stared at the screen. The bag was over $2,400. I looked it up. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was the wording, "Smooth things over," as if betrayal was a smudge on the family dinner table, and money was Windex. A week ago, Tamsin had called me a leech. A month ago, just an IT girl. And now, Verina wanted me to drop a couple grand so Tamsin could play independent woman in front of her friends with a designer bag she didn't earn. I set the phone down and walked to the sink, rinsed my mug. The air inside the apartment had shifted. Not warmer, not colder. Just different. Like a wire had finally snapped quietly inside my chest. Not 30 minutes later, I got a DM from Owen. She told me you pulled the plug on her tuition. "That's brutal, Cal. Hope you're proud of destroying someone's future. All over your ego?" I didn't respond. I didn't even finish reading the message twice. Instead, I opened our shared drive folder, the one labeled T-Support, Tuition and Housing. I changed its name to Revoked. Then I removed every shared permission. I archived the message from Owen and screenshotted it just for good measure. Not out of fear, out of habit. Documentation was how I stayed sane in chaos. After that, I opened my journal and wrote only one line. They thought the warning was for show. But systems don't warn, they execute. It was almost noon when I logged into the housing platform. Tamsin's lease was technically mine, signed under my name, on my credit, tied to my insurance. She was a subtenant in theory only. I clicked into the account and flagged it for ownership verification. Within the hour, an email pinged back. "Ownership confirmed. You may request a lock change or proceed with formal lease termination. Please confirm action." I didn't click anything, not yet. People think retaliation always comes with noise, doors slamming, voices raised, but the most permanent things in life don't scream. They whisper. That night, as I was closing my laptop, Verina's number popped up. A voicemail, not a call. Of course, I let it go to message, then hit play. "We raised you better than this. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I know this isn't who you are. Maybe you've made some money, maybe you think you're too good for us now. But this attitude, this cruelty, it's not how we raised you. I hope you can look at yourself in the mirror and still be proud." There was a long pause at the end, like she wanted to say more, but ran out of the kind of words that fit her version of reality. I sat in the dark, the soft hum of the fridge filling the silence. I didn't play it back. I didn't save it. I deleted it and whispered into the empty air. This is where I came from, but not where I'll end. 2.5 days passed without a single word. Not from Verina. Not from Tamsin. Not from anyone in that carefully curated circle they called family. Then, just past noon on Wednesday, as I sat in a quiet corner of my co-working space, glass walls, steel furniture, filtered water on tap, my screen pinged. Renee had just finished her budget review and stepped out to take a call. I figured the message was from a client. It wasn't. "Isn't this your sister?" the message read. There was a link. I clicked. It was a GoFundMe page, created under a name I didn't recognize at first glance. Hope herself. But the profile photo removed all doubt. Tamsin, sitting on the campus steps, hoodie pulled tight, looking upward like she was praying for a miracle. The lighting was intentional, backlit, soft, emotional. The description hit harder than the image. I've come so far. But without help, I might not graduate. After losing financial support from my only sibling, due to her unpredictable behavior, I'm facing eviction and being forced out of school. Please, anything helps. This isn't just tuition, it's a lifeline. Unpredictable behavior? There were photos embedded. Her crying outside the student center. A screenshot of an overdue notice, one she must have made herself. It wasn't real. I knew because I never let payments lapse. Not once. She painted me as unstable, as cold, as cruel. My hand didn't shake, not even a twitch. Instead, I pulled up my email, searched for every document I'd ever stored regarding Tamsin's education. Tuition invoices, Venmo transfers, emails with the housing manager. I opened a blank folder and began dropping files inside one by one. I didn't know how I was going to use them yet, but I was done playing defense. Around 5 p.m., I got the second hit. This time it was Facebook. Tamsin had posted a status, public. The kind of thing people write when they want to look brave while dragging someone. You think you know someone, especially when it's your own blood. But money changes people. Sometimes they stop seeing you as family and start treating you like a project. I never asked to be saved. I just wanted support. Now I'm alone, facing eviction, while she gets applause. There were likes, hundreds, comments too. You're better off without her? Some people just use money to punish. She sounds toxic. Cut her off before she cuts deeper. Farina liked it. Owen commented, couldn't have said it better. I didn't cry. I didn't scroll. I didn't even log out. I just opened a new browser tab and pulled up Imgur, created a private album. I uploaded a PDF of every tuition payment from the past 3 years, copies of the housing lease, signed and dated screenshots of every monthly rent and utilities payment, the full health insurance registration document she'd begged me to file just once. I titled the album Fallacy. Then I returned to the GoFundMe page, copied the link, and posted one anonymous comment. Before you donate, maybe ask where the other $92,000 went. That was it. I didn't attach files. I didn't write a backstory. Just the one sentence. By morning, the campaign was gone. Suspended by the platform. No warning, no explanation. Someone must have flagged it, or several people did. I never followed up to check. On Facebook, the tide turned. Quiet at first, then louder. Wait, didn't her sister pay for her whole undergrad? This doesn't add up. I donated. I want a refund. Farina's comment disappeared. Owen's too. I didn't respond to any of it. I just watched it like you'd watch a fire finally burn itself out. That night, a message came in. Tamsin. That was low. You ruined me. I read it once. No reply. No reaction. Just opened the firewall log and revoked the last device still logged into my shared folder. She wouldn't be able to access any files from now on, not even accidentally. I didn't ruin her. I just stopped letting her use my name to build her fiction. The next morning, I pulled into the lot in front of Daniel's building with 10 minutes to spare. The sun was just starting to beat down on the glass panels of the structure, warming the dashboard of my car while the AC hummed low. I didn't bother checking my phone. I wasn't expecting anyone to text. The people who might have cared about what I was about to do had already made it clear where their loyalties stood. Inside the lobby, The air was cool and sterile. Polished tile floors clicked under the heels of passing employees, and the gentle whir of the espresso machine behind the reception desk gave the space a false sense of comfort. I sat in one of the waiting chairs near the window, phone in my lap, screen dark, watching the time inch forward. No nervous tapping, no second guessing. This was just another step. A legal formality, nothing more. At exactly 9, Daniel's assistant opened the frosted glass door and called me in. His office was as precise and impersonal as I remembered. Clean cedar scent undercut by printer ink and air conditioning. The desk was clear, save for the slim manila folder waiting in the center. Daniel didn't waste time. He slid the folder toward me and opened it to the top page. Leaseholder, Calliope Menendez, he said, tapping the highlighted line with the tip of his pen. Utilities have been transferred to your name. Insurance policy, too, under the LLC. He paused, looking up at me, expression unreadable, but not cold. Professional, detached. You don't have to explain anything, he said quietly. You just need to sign. I nodded. My hand didn't shake. I picked up the pen and signed my name cleanly across each line where a signature was required. I didn't flinch. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was the culmination of months of silence, gaslighting, passive aggression, and finally, erasure. He flipped to the termination notice next. This is already pre-filled. Once it's processed by the management company, the delivery will be made within 48 hours. After that, she'll have 7 days to vacate. I handed the signed document back to him. It'll be handled quietly, he said. No face-to-face unless you request it. I don't, I replied. Smart. 2 hours later, I parked across from the complex Tamsin had called home for nearly a year. Or rather, the place she had occupied while insisting she was just borrowing time, space, and patience. I didn't ring the buzzer. I didn't walk upstairs. That part of me, the one that would have begged for decency or resolution, was gone. I walked into the leasing office instead and handed the packet to the property manager. She gave it a quick skim, arching one brow slightly at the notarized documents, the legal formatting, the prepaid receipt for professional cleaning. Would you like us to schedule a lock change? She asked, clipboard in hand. Not yet, I said. Let's see how she handles it. She nodded, businesslike. No judgment. Just another tenant managing risk. Outside, I passed the communal mailboxes. My name was still on the metal plate for the unit. Etched, clear. Hers never was. She had never added herself. She never planned to. It wasn't an oversight. It was a boundary she refused to acknowledge. This had never been her home. She just nested in a structure I built, one she assumed would always hold her, no matter how carelessly she treated the walls. That evening, the blowback began. Text messages like slow, bitter punches to the ribs. Tamsin, you're heartless. I hope you can sleep at night knowing you're ruining your own family. Verena, how could you evict your sister? You think because you have money, you're allowed to humiliate her like this? Shame on you, Owen. You're burning the whole family down over your pride. That's all this is, just you needing to be in control. I didn't answer, not a single word, no justification, no rebuttal. I had tried explaining myself too many times before, and each time, my words had evaporated into silence or been thrown back at me like accusations. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it Freedom, Legally Filed. I uploaded scanned PDFs of the lease agreement, the signed termination form, utility statements, and the cleaning service receipt. I saved screenshots of each text. Not for vengeance, not for leverage, just for documentation. I'd learned that trusting my memory, or anyone else's version of events, was a losing game. By the time I finished organizing everything, the digital file structure was immaculate. So much of my life had been chaotic, reactive, emotional. This was clean, traceable, unarguable. It was almost midnight when I poured myself a mug of chamomile and sat quietly at the kitchen counter, staring at my phone. I scrolled through my contact list until I found Tamsin's name. I hit delete. Then I found Verena. Delete. Owen. Delete. No grand gestures, no ceremony, just a soft, internal click as their access to my life was severed. Later, I logged into my insurance portal. Under the next of kin section, the field blinked, waiting to be filled. I hovered for a while, thinking about what I used to put there. The names I used to think would catch me if I ever fell. Then I typed, none. By choice. Not estranged, not dead, just removed. Deliberately. Permanently. Before going to bed, I turned off the overhead light and stood by the window for a long while, looking out over the quiet street. The Arizona night stretched wide and black, the stars sharp and bright in a sky most people never bothered to notice anymore. The same sky that had always been there, even when I felt invisible beneath it. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like enough. The wind in Flagstaff cut different than it did in Tucson. It didn't slap your skin dry. It moved slow through pine needles and smelled like something green. Something old. The kind of air that reminded you were still breathing, even after everything. I'd been in the new loft for just under 2 weeks. It was smaller, simpler. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, windows that caught sunrise instead of traffic. I'd swapped chaos for quiet, and for the first time in years, my name was the only one on every form, every lock, every light switch. That morning, I was going through emails when the newsletter from Fullerton State showed up in my inbox. I didn't subscribe. They must have added me after I covered Tamsin's application fees 3 years ago. The subject line read, Parent of the Year, Meet Verena Dorsey. I didn't even blink. I opened the email. There she was, Verena, standing at a podium with Tamsin beside her, both smiling like they had invented hardship. The caption below the photo read, A single mother who never gave up. 4 years of dedication, sacrifice, and unconditional love. I clicked the unsubscribe button. No cursing, no tears, just a quiet exhale. I had been erased again. But this time, it didn't take anything from me. That afternoon, I walked to the community center 5 blocks from my new place. Every Thursday, I volunteered there, mentoring high schoolers in a basic web dev program. Nothing fancy, just an hour of presence, an hour of showing up. I never wore a name tag. I never mentioned my past. I just taught them how to debug errors, how to ask questions, how to not give up on themselves when the screen went blank. One girl, Janelle, lingered behind after class that day. She was quiet, smart, the kind of kid who always made herself smaller when adults spoke. She asked, Do you have family? I paused. Then I said gently, Not anymore. She nodded, didn't push, just tucked her Chromebook under her arm and whispered, I'm glad you show up anyway. That night, after dinner and dishes, I lit a candle and sat on the floor with an old wooden box I hadn't touched since the move. Inside was the family photo from Tamsin's graduation, the one I wasn't in. I stared at it for a moment, not in anger, but as a kind of inspection, like you'd study something you used to believe in. Then I placed it face down at the bottom of the drawer and slid it shut. Above my desk was a new frame, a photo of my first group of students, arms raised, half of them laughing, the others frozen in mid-thought. No one polished it, no one cropped me out. I was in the back, smiling like a real part of something. That same night, I got an email from Tamsin. The subject line was short, You win. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit. I made tea, brushed my teeth, folded laundry. Then I read it. I guess you got what you wanted. Control, space, a bank account with no strings. I hope it's worth it. You lost something too. You lost your only sister, and you'll never get me back. I didn't reply. I archived the message and dragged it into a folder I renamed History. It was never about winning. She had never been mine to lose. and I had stopped trying to get her back a long time ago. I just hadn't said it out loud until now. I turned off the light in the kitchen, sipped my tea, walked to the window. The stars up here were clearer, less polluted. They didn't blink so much as hold still. I whispered, more to myself than anything. They called me ungrateful, but I just stopped feeding what was never nourishing me. And maybe I didn't get the ending I once hoped for, but I got the one I needed. Hi, I'm Mayela. My sister accused me of stealing a $16,000 necklace. My parents didn't ask questions, they just told me to leave. So I did. And I stopped paying their mortgage, their bills, her tuition, all of it. They erased me from the family, but not from the finances. You ever give everything, only to be treated like you never existed? Because what hurt wasn't the accusation, it was realizing they never saw me in the first place. And that necklace? It was never lost. So why did they need me gone? Let me tell you what happened. Lorelei's birthday party looked like something straight out of a lifestyle blog. Strings of Edison lights swaying above the patio, a rented catering truck parked beside the fence, and guests walking around in perfectly coordinated pastels. If someone had walked in off the street, they would have assumed it was an engagement party, or maybe a baby shower. That's how much effort had gone into the celebration of my sister turning 35. I stood near the back door with a half-empty glass of club soda, watching as Dad handed her a small, deep blue box with a gold ribbon. It was the kind of box that could only mean one thing: jewelry, diamond jewelry. And sure enough, the moment she opened it, the crowd around her gave a collective gasp. "Oh my God!" Lorelei said, lifting the necklace from the velvet bed with perfectly manicured fingers. "Are you serious? This is real?" Mom laughed softly and said, "Of course it's real. Nothing but the best for our girl." Our girl! That phrase sat heavier in my chest than I expected. I smiled, even lifted my phone to capture a quick video, one I knew they'd expect me to email later. No one noticed that my hand shook just a little. No one knew I paid for that necklace. I'd wired the money quietly a week earlier, after a phone call from Dad that started with, "I know it's a lot to ask," and ended with, "She's been through so much lately, this would mean the world to her." It was never meant to be about fairness. Just family, he said. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him how many times I'd bailed them out. I simply transferred the 16th years and went back to my spreadsheet. It's easy to disappear in a family when you're the one who solves problems silently. Later that evening, while Lorelei was surrounded by friends, taking selfies with her, and the necklace, I handed her a silk scarf I'd picked up from a small boutique. Hand-dyed, lightweight, subtle. She took it, glanced at the tag, and smiled for half a second before moving on to the next gift. I stood there, still holding the card I forgot to give her, watching her hug someone who'd handed her a candle. They clapped when she opened the box, I whispered to myself. No one asked how it got there. I left before dessert. 2 days later, I was folding laundry on the futon in my apartment when my phone buzzed. A notification from Facebook. Lorelei had posted something. The image didn't load, but the caption stopped me cold. "Still can't believe someone would do this to me. My necklace is gone." No names, no accusations. But the implications? Oh, they were clear. At first, I thought maybe she'd misplaced it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But then came the comments. "People you trust the most can surprise you. Some folks really have no shame." One of our cousins tagged me with a question mark. I didn't reply. I didn't even like the post. I just sat there, the folded t-shirt in my lap, suddenly feeling like a weight. I stared at that post for a long time. Longer than I'd like to admit. And then the messages started trickling in. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly pinging me with, "Hey, what's going on?" Or, "Do you know what she's talking about?" It wasn't anger I felt, not yet. It was something quieter, more like erosion. Like standing on a cliff and realizing the wind's been stealing grains of ground under your feet for years. You just never looked down before. I closed the app, set the phone face down. That night, as I was washing up the dishes, My phone buzzed again, this time with a group text from Mom. Dinner Sunday night? Would love to have everyone together again. Just a little family check-in. The emoji made me pause. Mom rarely used emojis. It didn't feel warm. It felt deliberate. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stared at the message. I thought about not responding. I thought about replying, "Is this about the necklace?" But in the end, I just typed, "I'll be there." Even as I pressed send, I felt the chill crawl up my spine. Maybe I hoped they'd want to talk things out. Maybe I hoped someone would say, "This is crazy, of course it wasn't you." But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a check-in. This was a setup. I sat down at my desk, opened a blank note, and started writing down the dates, when I'd made payments, covered tuition, transferred funds. Not because I planned to bring it up. Just to remind myself, I wasn't imagining the things I'd done. I wasn't invisible. I was just easier to ignore than to thank. The next 48 hours moved in slow motion. I went to work. I answered emails. I even managed to fix a nasty data bug in one of our forecasting tools. But every action felt distant, like I was watching someone else live my day. Sunday came quicker than I'd hoped, and by late afternoon, I found myself double-checking my reflection in the hallway mirror. I'd chosen a soft blue blouse, neutral, quiet, inoffensive, nothing too sharp, nothing too loud. I drove over just before 6. The streets were quiet, just the way they always were on Sundays in our neighborhood. That kind of stillness that almost warns you. Be careful, something's coming. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed 3 cars already there. My parents', Lorelai's white crossover, and my uncle's truck. Strange. Uncle Charles hadn't been around for months. The door opened before I could knock. My mother smiled in that slightly forced way she always did when trying too hard. "Come in, sweetheart. Dinner's almost ready," she said, stepping aside as if nothing had happened. I followed her in, noticing the scent of baked cheese and something sweet. She'd made my favorite casserole, chicken and squash, the one she only ever made on my birthday. Except this wasn't my birthday, and she hadn't made it then either. Lorelai was already seated at the table, swirling a glass of red wine, nails perfectly polished, expression unreadable. Dad sat at the head of the table, arms crossed over a clean button-down. Everyone was already in position. I was the last piece of the puzzle. We sat, passed dishes, like we were rehearsing a Thanksgiving commercial. The tension was low at first, like a simmering pot. Just family pleasantries, surface-level conversation. Lorelai talked about her new project, something marketing-related, and Dad made a joke about TikTok trends he didn't understand. And then, just as Mom refilled my water glass, Lorelai tilted her head slightly and said, "You know what's wild? I still haven't found that necklace." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Which one?" Uncle Charles asked casually, clearly playing his part. "The one from my birthday. The diamond drop," she replied, her eyes locking on mine. "The one I wore at the party. I had it in my jewelry box, but now, gone." A silence fell over the table, like someone had turned the volume down on the entire room. "I thought you said it might have been misplaced," I said carefully, not breaking eye contact. "I thought so too," she said, almost smiling. "But I've looked everywhere. It's not like I leave things lying around." "I'm sure it'll turn up," Mom offered gently. "It's strange, though," Lorelai continued, her voice syrupy. "I mean, Mayela, you were upstairs before dinner that night, weren't you?" I blinked. Once, twice. "Yes, I used the bathroom." "That's right, but the hallway light was off, and I could have sworn I saw your door open." "I didn't go in your room." Dad's voice cut through the air like a sudden storm. "Let's not turn this into something it's not." Lorelai leaned back, crossing her arms. "I'm just saying, someone was in there, and now it's missing." I looked at Mom, hoping she'd intervene. Instead, she kept folding the edge of her napkin. Then came the line that shifted the room entirely. Well, Lorelei said, setting her wine down, I found the box. That pulled everyone's gaze. The necklace box, she clarified, eyes never leaving mine. It was under the bookshelf, in your old room. My mouth went dry. Dad's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Is there anything you'd like to tell us? I shook my head slowly. I haven't touched that room in over a year. Why would I? People do strange things under pressure, he said, cutting me off. I didn't take it, I said clearly. You know me. I thought I did, he muttered. Mom still hadn't spoken. Lorelei added, if it was a misunderstanding, you can just give it back. No one wants this to get ugly. There's nothing to give back, I snapped, my tone firmer now. I don't have your necklace. I never did. Dad stood. Then maybe it's best you leave. Cool off. Think this through. Excuse me? You heard me. I looked at each of them. None of them flinched, not even Charles. The same man who once told me I was the only kid in the family who had a brain. I came here for dinner, not an ambush. You came here to play innocent, Lorelei muttered. That's enough, I said, voice steady. You've made your point. You want a thief, but you don't want the truth. You want drama, not facts. Dad pointed toward the door. Go. My mother stood then, but didn't stop him. Didn't stop me. So I walked. Not to the guest room where I used to stay, not to gather things. Because I knew. Nothing in that house belonged to me anymore. Outside, the night had turned cool. I stepped down onto the porch slowly, like my body needed time to adjust to the fact that I had just been evicted from my own family. As I reached the sidewalk, I glanced up. Lorelei was watching from the upstairs window, arms folded, that same smirk still there. I didn't give her the satisfaction of looking away. No bag, no charger, not even my favorite mug from the kitchen. But I had something else now, something I hadn't had before. Clarity. I didn't go far that night, just drove until the lights faded and the air didn't smell like memories. I ended up in a dimly lit short-term rental about 15 minutes away, a converted garage with barely enough space for a twin bed and a kitchenette the size of my old walk-in closet. But it was quiet, and right then, quiet was luxury. I collapsed onto the lumpy futon without changing clothes. My shoes were still on. No charger, no change of clothes, no toothbrush, just my purse and the weight in my chest. I tried to sleep, but all I could see when I closed my eyes was that ridiculous smirk on Lorelei's face as I stepped off the porch. By morning, my phone was at 2%. I found an old Android charger tucked in the drawer beside the bed. One of those lucky coincidences that felt like it came with a wink from the universe. I plugged in and stared at the blinking screen until it flickered back to life. The first message was from work, just a meeting reminder. The second was from my mom. Hope you made it home okay. No period, no warmth, just neutral. I didn't respond. Instead, I messaged my manager and asked if I could work remote for the week. He didn't ask questions, just said, take the time you need. After showering, I made a list on the back of an old receipt. Deodorant, socks, toothpaste, phone charger, pain relievers, cheap flats for work calls. I took the car to a nearby strip mall and bought everything in under 20 minutes. No hesitation, no checking prices. I just needed to stop feeling like I was unraveling. Back at the rental, I laid the new items across the foot of the bed like supplies for an emergency. Maybe that's exactly what this was. Later that evening, I sat on the edge of the mattress with a reheated burrito in one hand and my phone in the other. I was flipping through social media like it owed me answers. And then I saw it. A video from Lorelei's account titled, GRWM, Birthday Dinner Look. Get ready with me. Typical. She stood in front of her vanity, curling her hair, applying foundation, talking to the camera in that fake soft voice she always used when trying to sound relatable. But it wasn't her words that stopped me. It was what was behind her, in the mirror. Hanging delicately around her neck, half tucked beneath her blouse, was the diamond drop necklace. the same one that had supposedly gone missing, the one that got me kicked out of our family's dinner, the one she'd cried over in front of Mom, the same necklace she'd said was definitely stolen. I blinked, paused the video, rewound it. There it was again, clear as day. A glint of betrayal caught in glass and pixels. I didn't react. No yelling, no calling, no dramatic post. I simply downloaded the video and took 2 clean screenshots of the moment the necklace was most visible. One framed, one zoomed. Labeled them and saved them to a folder titled Backup Personal. No one needed to know. Not yet. I stared at the screenshots for a long time. Not because I doubted what I saw. I was past that. I just couldn't believe how easy it had been for her. To lie. To perform. To rip apart decades of trust with one manufactured scene. But that's the thing about people like Lorelei. They don't need to be right. They just need to be believed. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small coffee shop a few blocks from the rental, trying to piece together a version of my week that would make sense to anyone else. My laptop was open. The video paused at the exact second Lorelei turned toward the mirror. The necklace shimmered like it had its own spotlight. I didn't touch my drink, just kept tapping my fingers against the lid. What did I do with this? Send it to my parents? They'd ignore it, or worse, defend her. Say it was an old video, say I misunderstood. Post it online? That would make me the bitter one, the messy one. I thought about confronting her directly, but I already knew how that would go. You're reaching. You're jealous. Wow, obsessed much? She'd spin it in seconds, and even if I cornered her with truth, what would I win? The necklace? The right to sit at the table again? No. I closed the laptop. This wasn't the moment to shout. This was the moment to prepare. I went back to the rental and began organizing everything. Bank transfers, tuition receipts, gift records, text messages, screenshots. I wasn't planning a war. I was building an archive. I labeled folders by year, made backups in the cloud. Every time I added a file, I felt lighter. Not because it erased the damage, but because I wasn't letting anyone rewrite what I knew to be real. People only get away with lies when no one is willing to hold the truth, and I wasn't done holding it. By the time I'd finished sorting the files, the clock on the microwave blinked 3:42 a.m. I hadn't noticed how long I'd been working until the cheap desk lamp began to hum from being on too long. My back ached, my eyes burned. But oddly, I felt grounded. For the first time in days, I knew exactly what I was doing. The next morning, I woke to 3 text notifications. One from my bank, reminding me a recurring payment was due for the water utility account. Another from the mortgage company. And one from my mother. Power flickered this morning. Is that something on the city's side? I didn't reply. Instead, I sat down at the small fold-out table that doubled as a desk and opened my bank dashboard. Each monthly payment, electric, gas, internet, waste management, lined up like little digital bruises, proof of what I'd been shouldering alone for years. No one had ever asked how they stayed afloat. They just assumed the money showed up. Like magic. Or maybe like obligation. Click. I canceled the electric bill first. Click. Then the water. Then the mortgage. That one sat heavier. I stared at it for a moment. My name wasn't on the deed, wasn't on the loan. But for over 36 months, my account had paid it. If I don't live there, I said out loud, I don't need to fund it. Click. Each cancellation felt like a window opening. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally stopped participating in a version of reality where my absence was noticed only when my money didn't arrive on time. Later that afternoon, I took my laptop and headed to the coffee shop around the corner. It had become a quiet haven, a place where no one knew my last name or my sister's face. I ordered a black coffee, set up near the back, and tried to focus on work. Around 2:10 p.m., just as I was about to join a video call for a product planning session, a message popped up on my screen from a contact I hadn't seen in over 2 years. Jalen Merrick. I blinked. Jalen wasn't just a name from the past. He was Lorelei's ex, the one she never talked about after their breakup. He'd always been decent to me, though we never kept in touch. His message was short, almost clinical. I saw what happened at the birthday dinner. I was at the lounge last Friday. She was bragging about finally getting you out of the picture. I sat there, frozen, the cursor still blinking in my draft email. She said the necklace wasn't stolen, just misplaced. But when your dad reacted like that, she didn't correct him. Didn't stop it. Laughed, actually. He attached a blurry photo. Lorelei at a dimly lit bar, her head thrown back in laughter, the necklace clearly glinting beneath her collarbone. I didn't respond. Not yet. I saved the message, exported the photo, and moved it into a folder marked Quiet Evidence. I renamed it with the date and time. I knew what I was doing now wasn't about confrontation. It was about collection. The message confirmed what I already knew in my gut, but hearing it from someone else, someone who had nothing to gain, it turned the suspicion into certainty. That changed everything. That evening, back at the rental, I opened my laptop again and went straight to the mortgage payment platform. I clicked Unlink Account. The final digital tie between me and that house, gone. Then, I removed my card from the insurance account and the property tax autopay. All of it. If they wanted me out, they were going to learn what my absence really meant. No note, no warning, just the absence of coverage, the absence of convenience, the absence of me. I closed my laptop, sat in silence. You don't realize how many ways you're still tethered to people until you start cutting cords. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just let go. That night, I fell asleep without tossing. No dreams. Just a stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The next morning arrived without drama. No nightmares. No jolts awake. Just light pressing through the slats of the blinds and the mechanical hum of the mini fridge at my feet. I sat up slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wasn't in a hurry. For once, no one needed me to fix something. Still in my t-shirt and borrowed sweatpants, I walked over to the folding table and opened my laptop. A fresh spreadsheet greeted me like an old friend. I hadn't touched it since before the birthday dinner, but the tabs were all still there. Mortgage history, tuition records, utilities, credit card transfers. I opened a new sheet, titled it Personal Ledger, and started typing. First column, date of transaction. Second, purpose, rent, groceries, prescriptions, dentist copay. Third, recipient, dad, mom, Lorelei, textbook, utilities, autopay. Line by line, I built my case. I didn't cry, didn't pause, didn't second guess. It wasn't about revenge, it was about memory. I was tired of letting other people rewrite the past. By the time I finished, the total at the bottom of the sheet read 243 188 seans in 72s. It took my breath a moment to catch up. That number didn't include the time spent driving my mom to appointments, or covering surprise bills, or the interest I paid on credit cards used to float family emergencies. I printed it, stapled the pages together, slid the stack into a yellow folder, and wrote across the top in black Sharpie. Truth. If anyone ever dared to say, "You never really helped," I could hand them this instead of explaining. Around 1:30 that afternoon, while I was heating leftover rice in the microwave, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Dad. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Hi," I said, flat and unassuming. He didn't return the greeting. "Did you change something with the bills?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes," I said calmly. "I canceled all the autopays tied to my account." Silence on the other end. Not confusion, just the weight of him having to speak next. "You could have at least warned us." I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted him to hear the echo of his own words. "You told me I didn't belong in that house," I said. "Why would I keep paying for a home I was thrown out of?" "That's not how any of this was supposed to go," he snapped. "We didn't ask you to do any of that. You chose to. That's on you." It was one of those lines people use when they don't want to feel guilty, sharp enough to hurt, but just vague enough to deny intention, like tossing a rock into a window and saying you didn't mean for it to break. "You're right," I said. "I did choose to help, every time. I chose to give, and you chose to pretend it was owed. Mela, I didn't wait for the rest. You chose to believe I was a thief. You chose not to ask me. You chose not to defend me. And now you're surprised I stopped showing up?" He said nothing. I let the silence hang between us, long and uncomfortable, before finally ending the call. Afterward, I didn't pace, didn't shake, just walked back to the microwave, pulled out the bowl of rice, and sat at the table. While I ate, I opened a new folder on my laptop and titled it, "For Attorney If Needed." I scanned every bank statement, every tuition invoice, every email thread confirming wire transfers. I organized them by year, then by category. In a separate document, I started typing a timeline. A chronology of care. It wasn't bitter, it was factual. If anyone ever wanted to drag this into court, or worse, into some public dispute, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to be ready. I didn't want to fight. But I also wasn't going to fold. Some people think being quiet means being weak. But silence can be strategy. And I was done letting guilt determine the terms. Generosity isn't a debt. It's a choice. But when that choice gets treated like an expectation, something inside you changes. And mine already had. By Friday morning, the stillness I'd earned had become routine. I no longer woke with dread. No morning anxiety. Just a quiet resolve. I brewed coffee in the dented French press left behind by a former guest of the rental, sat down at the table, and began scanning the news like I did every morning. Detached but attentive. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Haley. It was a photo of a formal invitation. Elegant script embossed in gold on cream paper. "You're cordially invited to celebrate Warren and Elira Sutter's 40th wedding anniversary." Underneath, the names, "Hosted by their daughter, Lorelei." That word, daughter, sat on the page like a dare. Only one name, just Lorelei. I stared at the image for a few seconds before zooming in on the venue name. I knew that place. I was the one who had paid the deposit nearly a year ago, back when my parents were pretending things would turn around soon. I remembered covering the first half to hold the date, Dad promising to settle up soon. The photo had been sent without comment, no explanation, just the image and the unspoken invitation to notice what was missing. They deleted me, but used my money to send out the mailers. It wasn't surprising, but it still landed like a slap. I closed the message. Didn't reply. I didn't need to. Around midday, I took a short break from work and scrolled through social media to clear my head. A bad habit, I know. But sometimes it helped, not this time. On LinkedIn, right near the top of my feed, there it was. Lorelei's new post. A filtered photo of her in a cap and gown from her recent graduation ceremony, throwing her head back dramatically under a tree, her arms raised in some overacted gesture of triumph. The caption read, "Couldn't have done it without Mom and Dad's unwavering support. Grateful beyond words." That part didn't sting, at least not as much as the comments underneath. "You've got the best parents. So proud of you and them. True definition of family." The lie wasn't even creative. It was so cleanly packaged that it almost looked like truth. And no one, not one person, mentioned the fact that tuition at her private grad school ran over $45K per year. Or that she'd never had a job that lasted more than 6 months. I didn't click like, didn't comment, just hit save post and logged out. But it stayed with me. I sat there, watching the cursor blink in an empty document on my screen. The words not yet there, but the fury solid and rising. That evening, I opened my email, created a new message. No frills, no extra wording. Just truth, arranged in lines and attachments. 2. Every extended family member I still had an email for. Subject, for your information and mine. In the body, I wrote, I've remained quiet for a long time, not because I had nothing to say, but because I believed silence was safer. I'm not sending this for pity or sympathy. I'm sending it because facts matter, especially when stories are being told without me in them. Attached were 3 PDFs. Tuition breakdown, every invoice paid from my account, with timestamps. Event deposits, wedding venue receipt, party payments, check stubs, medical expenses, mom's prescriptions I covered when their insurance lapsed. At the bottom, I signed off with, I have no expectations, just records. I hovered over the send button. I wasn't doing this to start a fight. I was doing this so they couldn't rewrite the story without evidence. So that if anyone dared to whisper, she's just bitter, I could reply. With receipts. I hit send. And then I sat back. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel ashamed either. What I felt was something cleaner, like I'd finally pushed a weight off my chest that I wasn't meant to carry in the first place. Sometimes people talk about revenge like it's loud, like it explodes or burns or leaves someone crying, but this wasn't that. This was surgical, quiet, precise. This was clarity. The first call came the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. Then another buzzed in before I'd even gotten out of bed. Same area code, different number. By the time I had poured a cup of coffee and opened my laptop, 3 more missed calls had joined the queue. All unspoken, all urgent in their silence. I didn't need to listen to the messages. I already knew. By mid-afternoon, I decided to run a few errands. I threw on jeans and a hoodie, tucked my hair under a baseball cap, and drove out to the pharmacy to refill my thyroid medication. It had slipped my mind the last few days, buried beneath spreadsheets and emotional debris. The moment I stepped inside the store, I noticed the pharmacist's assistant stiffen. She was usually friendly, Chloe, if I remembered correctly. Her smile faltered slightly as I approached. Hi, I'm here to pick up a refill for Mayela Sutter, I said, offering the usual polite tone I reserved for public spaces. She typed for a few seconds, glanced at the screen, then looked back at me with a carefully controlled expression. It looks like your coverage was removed. It says you're not listed under the plan anymore. I blinked. Excuse me? She lowered her voice. It was changed last week, retroactively. I can still fill the prescription, but it'll be out of pocket. Of course. I nodded once. That's fine. As she rang it up, I pulled out my debit card. The total wasn't astronomical, but the message was crystal clear. They didn't just push me away, they erased me. I left the store without saying another word. Didn't slam the door, didn't complain. Just walked back to my car and sat for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle. I wasn't just being cut off emotionally, they were cutting me out legally, financially, institutionally, as if undoing my contributions somehow rewrote my presence. Later that evening, after dark had crept in and the city lights flickered through the blinds, I opened my email to find a message from a coworker. Subject line, "You should see this." I clicked it. Attached was a TikTok clip, just 7 seconds long. Lorelei's face filled the frame, her makeup half done, curling iron in one hand. She was doing one of those "get ready with me" videos, the kind influencers love. But behind her, in the reflection of the vanity mirror, clear as daylight, was the necklace. The diamond drop necklace. The one she had sobbed over, accused me of stealing. The one that had gotten me cast out of my parents' home like an unwanted visitor. She wore it casually, tucked just beneath her collarbone, half visible as she adjusted her blouse. No edits, no filters. Just truth, hiding in plain sight. I paused the video, took 3 screenshots, labeled the file. Necklace proof LD, March 22.move. I didn't call her. I didn't send it to anyone. I opened my archive. For the next hour, I built new folders, photos, receipts, medical, voicemails, and now, video evidence. Everything had a label. Everything had a timestamp. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I wasn't planning to sue. But if they tried to bury me again, I'd have a digital trail wide enough to walk straight back into the truth without saying a word. I uploaded the screenshots, double-checked the file names, backed it up to 2 separate cloud services, sent an encrypted copy to my personal email, just in case. Then I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall above my desk. Nothing hung there, no photos, no notes, no reminders. Just white paint and quiet defiance. They can say I disappeared, I murmured. They can tell people I abandoned the family. But I'll know better. And now I have proof. Sometimes people don't need to scream to burn bridges. Sometimes they do it with signatures, with omissions, with quiet betrayals wrapped in polite smiles. They had removed me from the insurance like I was never born, like I was some temporary visitor who overstayed her welcome. But facts don't vanish just because someone edits you out of the family group text. As I uploaded the final file, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not rage, not sadness, certainty. Let them talk. Let them twist the story. I had receipts. I had video. And most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. The next day started with a chime. Not an alarm clock, not a text from a friend. A calendar notification from my bank. Auto payment scheduled in 48 hours. It was for the mortgage. I stared at the alert like it was written in a language I no longer spoke. It didn't take long to decide. I grabbed my laptop, sat cross-legged on the floor near the outlet, and opened my banking portal. One by one, I found the linked accounts. The mortgage, the car insurance, the trash collection service. My card was attached to every one of them. They had made me invisible, but kept my money in circulation like it belonged to them. Not anymore. I clicked Cancel on the mortgage payment first. A pop-up appeared. Are you sure? I clicked Yes without hesitation. Then the next, and the next, until everything was disconnected. The screen went blank for a second, then refreshed. Just like that. Clean. No part of me was funding that house anymore. I closed the tab and leaned back. I didn't feel proud or spiteful. I felt finished. A few hours later, as I was catching up on a client report, a new email slid into my inbox. Subject line: Cease and desist. Defamation notification. From a law office I didn't recognize. I opened it. It was a formal letter, templated and icy. The tone wasn't just firm, it was dismissive. They accused me of slander, emotional disruption, and potential reputational damage to their client, whose name was right there in black and white, Lorelei Draper. It ended with a warning. If this behavior persists, our client may pursue legal remedies. I didn't even blink. Instead, I replied to the email. No explanation, no counter-argument, just a Dropbox link with one folder titled Evidence Packet. Inside were the video clips, screenshots, emails, the ledger of payments, the TikTok frame by frame, the screenshots from Jalen, the text from my dad after I canceled the mortgage draft that read, "You're being dramatic." I didn't say a word. Let the documents do the talking. 2 days later, a second email came. One line. Our client has chosen not to pursue legal action. No apology, no retraction, just silence in the form of retreat. By the end of the week, I'd made my decision. The lease on the Airbnb was about to expire, and for the first time in a while, I wasn't stuck. I drove across town and signed a one-bedroom lease under my full name. No cosigner, no questions asked. I changed my number that same afternoon, sent a single message to my job with the update. The rest? Not their business anymore. The moving van arrived the next morning. I packed my few bags, loaded them myself, and left nothing behind but a folded note on the kitchen counter. Thanks for the temporary shelter. M. Driving out of the city, I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. The sun was setting behind me, casting orange and blue shadows across the empty highway. There was something final about the way the county line sign disappeared in my rearview mirror. No fanfare, no goodbye, no dramatic closing monologue, just departure. I didn't need them to see me walk away. I just needed to walk. They could keep pretending I never existed. but they'd never erase what I carried. And now, they couldn't touch what I built on my own. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just leaves. Quiet, clean, and undeniable. The first week in the new apartment passed without much fanfare. I unpacked slowly, box by box, filling drawers I'd bought myself, hanging curtains that didn't belong to anyone else's taste but mine. There was a kind of peace in choosing your own towel colors. On the 7th morning, I woke up to soft light spilling across the hardwood floors. A breeze moved the sheer panels near the window, and for a few seconds, I let myself believe that maybe this was the quiet life I'd never had a chance to live. Then came the vibration. A text. I flipped my phone over. Mom. The message was short. No, hi, no context, no punctuation. You broke this family. I stared at the screen for a long while. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel the need to. I didn't tremble, didn't gasp, just tapped and held the message, selected delete, and went back to my coffee. Once upon a time, that sentence would have pulled me apart. I would have replayed it for hours, wondering what I could have done differently. I would have felt like the villain in a story I didn't write. Now it just sounded like someone blaming a mirror for reflecting what was always there. Later that afternoon, I finally finished decorating the bare wall in the living room. It had taken me weeks to decide what to put there. I didn't want anything generic. No live laugh love signs or store-bought motivational quotes. I wanted something honest. I pulled out a photo, one of me at age 8, standing barefoot in the backyard, holding a butterfly net and grinning like I discovered something important. Just me. No one else in the frame. I placed it inside a simple black frame and hung it in the center of the wall. Below it, I tacked up a single word I'd cut from thick cardstock. Enough. Not as a statement of anger, but as a declaration of self. I wasn't celebrating exile, I wasn't proud of the losses, but I also wasn't begging to be taken back. This home, tiny as it was mine. Not rented emotionally, not borrowed under conditions. Mine. I stepped back and looked at the picture, then the word beneath it. I spent years paying to belong. Turns out I was always enough, just too close to see it. That evening, I checked my voicemail inbox. It had been filling up, but I hadn't touched it in days. 10 new messages. I listened to none. One came from my aunt, one from a cousin, one from my father. His voice clipped, saying something about Lorelai going through a tough time. Another one asked if I could just talk to her. One of them even had the nerve to say, "We need to move past this." Move past what? Being accused of theft? Being erased? I tapped Select All and hit delete. Then I muted voicemail alerts. A week later, I bumped into my old high school friend while grocery shopping. We exchanged pleasantries, nothing too deep, until she casually mentioned that my dad was working part-time at a hardware store across town. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She didn't press. The same night, I got a message from an old coworker who still followed Lorelai on social media. "You might want to see this," it said. Attached was a screenshot of Lorelai selling designer bags and shoes online. "Big closet purge," the caption read. "Moving on." The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot it for revenge. I didn't need to. Sometimes people don't get punished. They just start feeling the weight of what you used to carry for them. The truth had done its job, not by attacking, but by existing. There's a common misconception that closure requires apology, but real healing doesn't wait for anyone's permission. It happens when you stop bleeding for people who keep cutting. And I had stopped. My life now was small, but it was real. I cooked for one, paid for one, answered to no one, and that, in itself, was wealth. I stood at my window that night, watching the last of the daylight disappear between two buildings. Somewhere behind me, a kettle began to whistle. I turned from the glass, poured the water, and settled into my chair with a quiet smile. Forgiveness isn't always a door you open. Sometimes it's a door you walk past, quietly, for good. Before I go, let me leave you with this. When I was younger, I thought loyalty meant keeping quiet. That if you loved people hard enough, long enough, they'd eventually see you. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-erasure. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's walking away with your dignity intact. And no, it won't come with applause or instant peace. But it will come with clarity, with space, with air you didn't know you'd been holding in for years. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the one holding a family together, only to be cut out of the photo, then I hope it reminded you. Your worth is not up for a vote. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes your silence, your exit, your no, is the legacy. So now let me ask you, have you ever been erased by the very people you held up? What did you do when your giving became invisible? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or just type 1 if this hit home for you. And if it didn't, tell me why. I want to understand every side. And hey, if you made it to the end of this video and felt something shift inside you, consider subscribing to this channel. We've got more stories that heal, reveal, and remind us we're never alone in what we've been through. See you in the next one.